The gavel didn't just sound like wood hitting wood. It sounded like the lid of a coffin, slamming shut. To everyone in that stifling courtroom, Julian Hayes looked like just another statistic. A black man in a faded orange jumpsuit, standing before a judge known for cleaning up the streets by any means necessary. Judge Patricia Halloway smiled that thin, viper-like smile, thinking she was sending another innocent man to rot for profit. She thought she was the predator. She didn't realize that the man in shackles wasn't a victim. He was the FBI's sharpest blade, and he was there to cut her corruption out at the root. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B of the 11th District Court had been broken for 3 days, or so they said. The heat was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the lungs, smelling of stale floor wax and nervous sweat. For Julian Hayes, sitting at the defendant's table with his hands clasped to hide the slight tremor of controlled rage, the heat was the least of his problems. He wore a jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big, the fabric rough against his skin. To the casual observer, he was exactly what the prosecution painted him to be. A drifter, a man with no fixed address, accused of aggravated assault and armed robbery of a liquor store on the east side of town. To his left sat Leo Coletti, a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept since the Carter administration. Leo's suit was rumpled, his tie stained with what looked like mustard, and his desk was a chaotic mountain of manila folders. Leo was a good man, Julian had realized over the last week of pre-trial hearings, but he was drowning. He was part of a system designed to crush people like Julian, not save them. "Rise," the bailiff droned, his voice devoid of interest. The door behind the bench swung open, and Judge Patricia Halloway swept into the room. She was a woman of sharp angles, a pointed nose, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes that were cold, hard chips of flint. She didn't look at the courtroom. She surveyed it, like a feudal lord inspecting her serfs. Julian kept his head down, eyes lowered, adopting the posture of the defeated. It was a role he had practiced for 6 months. Underneath the jumpsuit, taped securely to the inside of his thigh, was a micro-recorder the size of a stick of gum. It was currently transmitting audio to a sleek, unmarked van parked 3 blocks away, where Special Agent Sarah Jenkins and a team of federal analysts were listening to every breath. "Docket number 4492, Halloway announced, her voice crisp and commanding. "State versus Julian Hayes. Are we ready to proceed with jury selection? Mr. Baines?" District Attorney Clifford Baines stood up. He was Halloway's favorite pet, a man with a polished smile and a soul as oily as his hair. "The state is ready, Your Honor. We are eager to see justice done." "And the defense?" Halloway turned her gaze to Leo. She didn't even glance at Julian. To her, Julian was furniture. "Ready, Your Honor," Leo stammered, shuffling his papers. "Though, I would like to renew my motion for a change of venue, given the recent media coverage regarding the—" "Denied!" Halloway cut him off before he could finish. "Mr. Coletti, we have discussed this. This community has a right to judge its own. I will not have you delaying these proceedings with frivolous tactics." "It's not frivolous, Your Honor," Leo argued, his voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "The local paper ran an editorial yesterday calling my client a menace to society before the trial even started. A fair jury pool is impossible here." Halloway leaned over the bench, her glasses sliding down her nose. She peered at Leo, then shifted her gaze, for the first time, to Julian. Her eyes lingered on him, with a mixture of disgust and boredom. "Mr. Coletti," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr, "I decide what is fair in my courtroom, and frankly, looking at your client's history, I think the community is quite right to be concerned. Motion denied. Bring in the jury panel." Julian clenched his jaw. History. The history she was referring to was a fabricated rap sheet the FBI had planted in the system specifically for her to find. It was littered with minor offenses, dismissed charges, and vague accusations, the kind of record that screamed career criminal to a biased eye but held no actual convictions. It was bait, and she had swallowed it whole. As the bailiff went to retrieve the potential jurors, Julian risked a glance at the gallery. It was packed, mostly with older white residents of the county, Halloway's voting base. They whispered among themselves, casting wary glances at him. "Don't worry, kid," Leo whispered, leaning in. "I'm going to fight for you, but she's in a mood today." "It's okay, Mr. Coletti," Julian said, his voice a rough rasp. He had to stay in character, uneducated, scared, resigned. "I just want it to be over." "That's what they want you to think," Leo sighed. "They want you to plead out, but you said you didn't do it." "I didn't," Julian said. And that part was true. The liquor store robbery had happened, but the perpetrator was a man named Silas Thorne, a low-level enforcer for the private prison company Secure Hold, the same company that had secretly contributed $50,000 to Judge Halloway's re-election campaign fund via a shell corporation. Julian wasn't just here to prove his innocence. He was here to prove that Halloway was sending men to Secure Hold facilities in exchange for kickbacks. The kids for cash scandal of the past was nothing compared to this. Halloway was filling beds for profit, targeting the vulnerable, the poor, and especially the black community. The jury pool filed in. Julian watched them closely. He was a profiler by trade, trained to read micro-expressions. He saw fear. He saw annoyance. But mostly, as their eyes landed on the judge, he saw reverence. Halloway had this town under her thumb. The selection process began, and immediately the fix was in. The voir dire, the process of questioning potential jurors, is supposed to be the bedrock of a fair trial. In courtroom 4B, it was a slaughter. D.A. Baines moved with the confidence of a man who knew the referee was on his payroll. He asked soft, leading questions to the jurors who looked like they belonged to the local country club. "Mrs. Gable," Baines smiled at an elderly woman in the front row, "do you believe that our police force does a good job protecting us from dangerous elements?" "Oh, absolutely," Mrs. Gable nodded vigorously, clutching her purse. "My nephew is a deputy." Leo Coletti stood up, objection, calling for a conclusion and bias. "Overruled," Halloway said, not even looking up from her notes. "It's a general question, Mr. Coletti." "Sit down." Baines smirked and continued. But when it was Leo's turn, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to rise. Leo focused on a middle-aged man in a plaid shirt, a mechanic named Mr. Henderson. Julian had noted Henderson earlier. He had looked at Julian with curiosity rather than immediate condemnation. "Mr. Henderson," Leo asked, "do you believe that a man is innocent until proven guilty, regardless of what he looks like?" "I do," Henderson said firmly. "My brother got falsely accused once. I know how the system can get it wrong." Julian saw Halloway's head snap up. Her eyes narrowed. This was a variable she didn't like. A juror with empathy. A juror with doubt. Before Leo could ask the next question, Halloway interjected. "Mr. Henderson, are you saying that your personal experience would prevent you from listening to the instructions of this court?" Henderson blinked, confused. "No, Your Honor, I'm just saying. You seem to harbor a significant bias against law enforcement based on your brother's alleged mistreatment." Halloway twisted his words effortlessly. "We need jurors who can be objective, not those with a vendetta against the police." "I don't have a vendetta," Henderson protested, his face reddening. "I think you do," Halloway said, her voice icy. excused for cause. "You may step down, Mr. Henderson." A murmur went through the room. Leo stood there, stunned. "Your Honor, that is highly irregular." He expressed no bias against the prosecution. He only stated, "I have made my ruling, Mr. Coletti." Halloway slammed her hand on the bench, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Do not test my patience. I will not have a juror who enters this box with a preconceived notion that the system is broken." Irony, Julian thought, suppressing the urge to shake his head. She's removing the only people who believe the system works the way it should, to protect the way she forces it to work. The pattern continued for 3 hours. Every time a person of color, a younger person, or anyone who seemed remotely open-minded took the stand, Halloway or Baines found a reason to cut them. They used peremptory challenges aggressively, and when Leo raised a Batson challenge, claiming they were excluding jurors based on race, Halloway scoffed. "Mr. Coletti, simply because the defendant is black does not mean you are entitled to a jury that looks like him," Halloway lectured, playing to the gallery. "We want a jury of peers, law-abiding citizens." By the time the final 12 were seated, the jury box looked like a choir from the 1950s. 11 white jurors, and 1 older Hispanic man who looked terrified to be there. The trial began immediately. Halloway didn't believe in breaks. "Opening statements," she barked. Baines buttoned his jacket and walked to the jury box. He didn't use notes. He was a storyteller, spinning a yarn of fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Baines began, his voice grave. "We live in a beautiful town, a safe town. But there are those who come from outside, who look at what we have and want to take it. The defendant, Julian Hayes, is one of those men. On the night of November 14th, he walked into Miller's Liquor, produced a .38 caliber pistol, and pistol-whipped a 60-year-old clerk for $80. Baines paused, walking over to point a finger directly at Julian. Julian flinched, playing the part. "He didn't care about the law," Baines hissed. "He didn't care about the victim. He is a predator, and today I am going to ask you to lock the cage." The jury ate it up. They stared at Julian with open hostility. Then it was Leo's turn. He stood up, looking tired. "Members of the jury, Julian Hayes is a man, not a predator. A man who was sleeping in his car 3 miles away when this crime occurred. The prosecution has no DNA, no fingerprints, just a grainy video and a witness who was told who to pick out of a lineup." "Objection!" Baines shouted. "Counsel is arguing facts, not in evidence." "Sustained," Halloway said. "Mr. Coletti, stick to what the evidence will show, not your conspiracy theories regarding the police lineup." "The evidence will show," Leo corrected, gritting his teeth, "that the identification procedure was flawed, that my client is innocent." Leo sat down. He looked defeated already. "Call your first witness," Halloway ordered. The prosecution called Detective Miller. He was a large man, necklace and red-faced. He recounted the arrest. He described finding Julian in his car. "And did you find a weapon?" Baines asked. "We found a .38 caliber pistol under the passenger seat," Detective Miller said. Julian's heart rate remained steady, though his mind was racing. He knew there was no gun in his car. He had swept that vehicle himself before he went undercover. The gun had been planted. Perfect. "Objection!" Leo shot up. "We have never seen this gun. It wasn't in the discovery file." The courtroom went silent. This was a major violation. Evidence had to be shared with the defense. Halloway waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, sit down, Mr. Coletti. It was a clerical error. I'm sure the DA's office meant to send it over. I'll allow it." "You'll allow it?" Leo's voice cracked. "Your Honor, this is trial by ambush. I haven't had a chance to examine the weapon, run ballistics, check for prints." "You can look at it during the lunch recess," Halloway said, checking her watch. "We are not delaying this trial because you aren't prepared." "I am prepared," Leo shouted, finally losing his cool. "I am prepared for a fair trial, not an ambush." "Bailiff," Halloway roared, "remove the jury." As the confused jurors were ushered out, Halloway leaned over the bench, her face a mask of fury. "Mr. Coletti," she hissed, "I have held you in contempt before, and I will do it again. You are treading on thin ice. You are questioning the integrity of this court. I am questioning the integrity of this evidence," Leo shot back. Julian watched silently. He felt a pang of guilt for Leo. The man was fighting a dragon with a toothpick. But this needed to happen. The FBI needed Halloway to admit the gun into evidence despite the violation. They needed her to officially sanction the planted evidence on the court record. "The objection is overruled," Halloway stated with finality. "The gun is admitted as Exhibit A. Bring the jury back." As the jurors filed back in, Julian looked at the camera in the corner of the room. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "Strike one, Judge," he thought. "You just accepted a planted weapon without chain of custody. You're getting sloppy." But Halloway wasn't done. She wasn't just rigging the trial, she was enjoying it. She began to interject during Leo's cross-examination of the detective, answering questions for the witness, rolling her eyes when Leo spoke, and sighing loudly. She was signaling to the jury, "This lawyer is a joke, and his client is guilty." By the end of the day, Julian could feel the hatred radiating from the jury box. They didn't see an FBI agent. They didn't even see a human being. They saw a monster that Judge Halloway had told them to destroy. As the bailiff handcuffed Julian to take him back to the holding cell, Halloway caught his eye. "Sleep well, Mr. Hayes," she mocked softly, so only he and the bailiff could hear. "The accommodations at Secure Hold are robust." Julian looked her dead in the eye for the first time. He dropped the fear. He dropped the slouch. For a split second, the predator inside him surfaced. "I sleep just fine, Judge," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the street slang. "Do you?" Halloway blinked, startled by the sudden shift in his demeanor. But before she could process it, the bailiff shoved Julian forward. "Move it!" the bailiff grunted. As Julian walked out, he knew the trap was set. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. Tomorrow, he would let them think they had won. Day 2 of the trial began with the same stifling heat, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was heavier now, thick with the arrogance of a prosecution team that knew they couldn't lose. Julian sat at the table, his posture slumped again. He watched as DA Clifford Baines called his star witness to the stand. "The state calls Gary Sneed to the stand," Baines announced. Gary Sneed was a thin, twitchy man with yellowing teeth and a suit that looked like it had been bought at a garage sale an hour ago. He walked to the witness stand with a strange mixture of nervousness and bravado, avoiding looking at Julian entirely. "Mr. Sneed," Baines began, leaning against the jury box rail. "Can you tell the jury where you were on the night of November 14th? "I was walking my dog," Sneed said, his voice scratching like sandpaper. "Near Miller's Liquor, just doing my nightly loop." "And what did you see?" Sneed cleared his throat. "I saw a man run out of the store. He was holding a gun. He looked wild, crazy eyes." "And do you see that man in the courtroom today?" Sneed finally looked at Julian. He pointed a shaking finger. "Yeah, him. The guy in the orange." "Let the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, Julian Hayes," Baines said smugly. "No further questions." Leo Coletti stood up for cross-examination. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. He adjusted his glasses and approached the witness. "Mr. Sneed?" Leo asked, holding a piece of paper. "You say you were walking your dog. What kind of dog do you have?" Sneed blinked. A pit bull mix. A pit bull mix, Leo repeated. Interesting, because I have a copy of your landlord's lease agreement here, subpoenaed this morning. It says strictly no pets allowed at your residence. Objection, Baines shouted. Relevance. It goes to credibility, Your Honor, Leo argued. If he doesn't have a dog, why was he walking one? Judge Halloway sighed, looking at the ceiling fan that wasn't spinning. I'll allow it, but make it quick, Mr. Coletti. Well, Mr. Sneed, Leo pressed. Do you have a dog? I was walking my girlfriend's dog. Sneed pivoted quickly. And what is your girlfriend's name? Leo asked. Sneed froze. His eyes darted to Baines, then to the judge. Sarah. Sarah Jones. Sarah Jones. Leo wrote it down. Okay. Mr. Sneed, isn't it true that you have 3 pending charges for possession of narcotics in this very courthouse? The courtroom gasped. Sneed looked like he wanted to bolt. Objection! Baines roared. Improper character evidence. It's not character evidence, it's motive, Leo shouted back, finding his spine. If Mr. Sneed was offered a deal on his own charges in exchange for testimony against my client, the jury has a right to know. Halloway slammed her gavel. Sustained! Mr. Coletti, approach the bench immediately. Leo walked to the sidebar, his face red. Julian could hear them whispering, his hearing sharpened by years of field work. Plus, the audio feed from the bug under the table was being relayed to his earpiece, a tiny, flesh-colored device deep in his ear canal. You will not drag this man's past into my courtroom, Halloway hissed at Leo. He's lying, Judge. He's a junkie making up a story to save his own skin, Leo whispered furiously. You can't let this stand. I can and I will, Halloway threatened. You ask him one more question about his criminal record, and I will hold you in contempt and throw you in a cell right next to your client. Do you understand me? Leo stared at her, horrified. This isn't a trial. It's a lynching. Step back, counsel, Halloway ordered loudly. Leo stepped back to the podium. He looked defeated. He looked at the jury, pleading with his eyes for them to see what was happening. But the jury looked bored. They trusted the judge. If the judge said the question was bad, then the lawyer must be bad. No further questions, Leo whispered. Julian watched Sneed step down. He tapped his left index finger against the table 3 times. In the surveillance van 3 blocks away, Agent Sarah Jenkins saw the signal on the video feed. That's the signal, she said to the tech specialist, Agent Miller. Sneed is a paid asset. Run his financials. I want to know who paid him, how much, and when. Check Baines's slush fund. Check Halloway's husband's construction company accounts. On it, Miller typed furiously. Got a hit. A deposit of $2,000 made yesterday to a Gary Sneed via Cash App from a burner account. Tracing the IP of the sender. It's pinging from inside the courthouse. Specifically, the district attorney's office Wi-Fi. Got him, Jenkins grinned. Save it. We need more. Back in the courtroom, Baines rested his case. The state rests, Your Honor. Very well, Halloway said. Mr. Coletti, call your first witness. The defense calls. Leo hesitated. He looked at his file. He had nothing. No alibi witness because Julian was undercover. No forensics because the judge blocked them. The defense calls the defendant, Julian Hayes. A ripple went through the crowd. It was rare for a defendant to testify. It was suicide in a rigged court. Julian stood up. He walked to the stand. He wasn't going to testify about the robbery. He was going to testify about them. Mr. Hayes, Leo asked, did you rob Miller's liquor? No, Julian said calmly. Where were you? I was sleeping in my car, Julian said. I'm new in town. I was looking for work. Mr. Hayes. Baines stood up for cross-examination, looking like a shark smelling blood. You say you were looking for work, but you have no resume, no references. You have a record, don't you? I have a history, Julian corrected. Not a conviction record. You have a history of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, Baines sneered. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, do you hate authority? I hate corruption, Julian said, his voice level. Halloway's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? Baines laughed. Are you accusing this court of corruption? I'm answering your question, Julian said, looking directly at Judge Halloway. I respect the law. I respect justice. But when the law is used as a weapon to fill prison beds for a paycheck, that isn't authority. That's organized crime. The courtroom went deadly silent. Strike that from the record, Halloway shrieked, her face turning a violent shade of purple. The jury will disregard that statement. Mr. Hayes, one more outburst like that, and I will have you gagged. You asked if I hate authority, Julian said, maintaining intense eye contact with her. I'm telling you what I hate. Get him off the stand, Halloway screamed at Leo. Your client is done. Leo looked terrified, but Julian just stood up calmly and walked back to his seat. He had planted the seed. He saw the mechanic juror, the one Halloway had kicked out earlier, sitting in the back of the public gallery. He hadn't left, and next to him, a reporter for the Washington Post was scribbling furiously. Julian had tipped off the reporter anonymously 2 days ago. The headline was going to be explosive. The closing arguments were a study in contrasts. Baines shouted and pointed. He called Julian a thug, a menace, and a cancer on our decent society. He played on every racial stereotype in the book, using dog-whistle language that Halloway allowed without a second thought. Leo Coletti spoke softly. He spoke about reasonable doubt. He spoke about the lack of physical evidence. You cannot send a man to prison because you are scared, Leo told the jury. You can only send him if you are sure. And how can you be sure when the witness lied about his dog? When the gun wasn't in the police report? But as Leo spoke, Judge Halloway rolled her eyes. She checked her watch. She drank water loudly. She was dismantling his defense, not with words, but with body language. Finally, Halloway gave the jury instructions. Usually these are standard legal definitions, but Halloway added her own clarifications. You must determine if the defendant is credible, she told the jury, and you may consider his outburst on the stand as evidence of his disrespect for the law. You may also consider that the police officers are sworn public servants, while the defendant is a transient. It was practically a directed verdict. She was telling them, convict him, or you are against the police. The jury retired to deliberate. Leo sat at the table, head in his hands. I'm sorry, Julian. I'm so sorry. I'm going to file an appeal immediately. We'll get this overturned. It's okay, Leo, Julian said, his voice surprisingly gentle. You did a good job. You stood up. I failed you, Leo whispered. You didn't fail, Julian said. You just didn't know the game was rigged. Everyone knows Halloway is tough, Leo said. But this was different. She was reckless today, like she didn't care who saw. She thinks she's untouchable, Julian said. That makes people sloppy. 2 hours later, the jury buzzed. They had a verdict. The courtroom filled up again. The air was electric. Halloway looked triumphant. Baines was already shaking hands with the cops in the front row. Will the defendant please rise? Halloway commanded. Julian stood up. He felt the weight of the moment. This was the tipping point. Mr. Foreman, Halloway beamed at the older man in the front row of the jury box. Have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. And how do you find the defendant? The foreman unfolded the paper. He didn't look at Julian. We find the defendant Julian Hayes, guilty of armed robbery, guilty of aggravated assault, guilty of resisting arrest. Halloway smiled, a genuine, predatory smile. Thank you for your service, jury. You have done this community a great service. She turned to Julian. Mr. Hayes, given the severity of these crimes and your obvious lack of remorse, I see no reason to delay sentencing. I am sentencing you to 25 years in the state penitentiary, to be served at the Secure Hold Maximum Security Facility. 25 years. For a robbery he didn't commit. Bailiff, take him away, Halloway ordered, banging the gavel. As the bailiff grabbed Julian's arm, Julian didn't move. He stood, planted like an oak tree. Mr. Hayes, move, the bailiff grunted. Not yet, Julian said loudly. His voice carried to the back of the room. What did you say? Halloway snapped. Get him out of here. I said, not yet, Julian repeated. He reached up to his ear and pulled out the tiny, flesh-colored earpiece. He dropped it on the defense table. It made a small clack sound. Then he reached into his jumpsuit pocket and pulled out a gold badge. He slammed it down next to the earpiece. Special Agent Julian Hayes, FBI, he announced, his voice booming with authority. Federal Corruption Task Force. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Halloway froze. Her gavel hovered in midair. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Baines dropped his pen. It clattered loudly on the floor. Lock the doors, Julian shouted, turning to the back of the room. Suddenly, the reporter from the Washington Post stood up and threw off his jacket, revealing an FBI windbreaker and a sidearm. The mechanic from the jury pool pulled a badge. The doors to the courtroom burst open. A dozen tactical agents in full FBI gear flooded the room. FBI, nobody move. Hands where we can see them. Agent Sarah Jenkins marched down the center aisle, flanked by 2 agents carrying federal warrants. She walked straight up to the prosecutor's table. Clifford Baines, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, and racketeering. Baines looked at Halloway, panic in his eyes. Patricia, do something. But Halloway was staring at Julian. The drifter. The thug. He was standing tall now, his shoulders back, the slouch gone. He looked at her with a cold, terrifying intelligence. Julian unzipped the top of his orange jumpsuit, revealing a Kevlar vest underneath. He walked out from behind the defense table, not as a prisoner, but as the man in charge. He stopped in front of the judge's bench. He looked up at her. She looked small now, shrinking behind the wood. Patricia Halloway, Julian said, his voice calm and deadly. I have recorded every word you said in this trial. I have the bank records of your husband's shell company, receiving funds from secure hold prisons. I have the text messages between you and Baines, coordinating the jury selection. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, the warrant. Step down from the bench, Julian ordered. You can't do this, Halloway stammered, her face pale as a sheet. I am a judge. I have immunity. Judicial immunity doesn't cover RICO charges and federal conspiracy, Julian said. You sold justice. Now you're going to pay for it. He turned to the bailiff, who was standing there with his mouth open, holding the handcuffs meant for Julian. Deputy, Julian said. Cuff her. The bailiff looked at the judge. He looked at the FBI agents pointing rifles. He looked at Julian. Slowly, the bailiff holstered his weapon. He walked up the steps to the bench. Judge, the bailiff said, his voice shaking. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. No! Halloway shrieked, clutching her robe. This is entrapment. This is a setup. Get away from me. Do it, Julian commanded. The bailiff grabbed her arms. She kicked and screamed, her dignity vanishing in an instant. As she was dragged down the steps of the dais, her robe snagged on a nail and ripped, revealing the expensive designer dress she wore underneath, paid for with the lives of innocent men. Julian stepped forward as they cuffed her. He leaned in close. "You gave me 25 years, Julian whispered. "With the federal charges we have lined up, wire fraud, deprivation of rights under color of law, racketeering, you're looking at life without parole." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "And judge?" he added. "The federal prison system doesn't have a secure hold contract. You're going to general population." As Halloway was dragged out, screaming threats, the courtroom erupted. The jurors were stunned. Leo Coletti was sitting in his chair, staring at Julian with wide, shocked eyes. Julian turned to Leo. He extended a hand. "You're a good lawyer, Leo," Julian said. "Sorry for the heart attack." Leo took the hand, shaking his head in disbelief. I thought you were a drifter." "I'm the janitor," Julian said, looking around the courtroom at the stunned gallery. "I'm here to clean up the trash." The chaos in courtroom 4B was only the spark. The explosion happened in the days that followed. The image of the Honorable Patricia Halloway, disheveled, screaming, and handcuffed, was plastered across every news network from CNN to Fox. The headline in the Washington Post, written by the undercover reporter who had been sitting in the gallery, read, "The gavel falls, FBI sting exposes judicial ring of terror." But for Special Agent Julian Hayes, the arrest was just the beginning. The real work was in the dissection. 2 hours after the courtroom raid, Julian sat in an interrogation room at the local FBI field office. Across from him sat Clifford Baines. The district attorney, once the picture of slick, arrogant confidence, now looked like a man melting. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, and he was sweating through his dress shirt. Julian placed a single file folder on the metal table. He didn't open it. He just let it sit there. "You know how this works, Clifford," Julian said softly. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't playing the bad cop. He was playing the inevitable force of nature. "I don't need to threaten you. I don't need to lie to you. I just need to tell you the math." Baines swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the mirror on the wall. "I want a lawyer." "You have a right to one," Julian nodded. "But by the time your lawyer gets here, parks his car, and gets through security, I'm going to be walking into the next room to talk to Judge Halloway. And here is the thing about Patricia. She's a survivor. She's a narcissist. Do you think she's going to protect you? Or do you think she's going to tell us that you masterminded the whole thing to save herself?" Baines flinched. He knew Halloway. He knew she would throw her own mother under a bus to avoid a parking ticket. "We have the emails, Clifford," Julian continued, tapping the folder. "We have the bank transfers from the shell company, Apex Consulting, into your offshore account in the Caymans. We know Secure Hold was paying you $5,000 for every conviction that carried a sentence of 10 years or more. You were selling human lives by the decade." Baines put his head in his hands. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, just to cover some campaign debts. And then it became a lifestyle, Julian finished for him. "Here is the offer. It expires in 5 minutes. You give us everything, not just Secure Hold. I want the names of every deputy who planted evidence. I want the specific cases where you withheld exculpatory evidence. I want the entire network. You do that, and I talk to the U.S. Attorney about taking the death penalty off the table. Because make no mistake, Clifford, in federal court, treason against the public trust can be a capital offense when it results in death. And we know 3 inmates died in Secure Hold facilities after you sent them there." Baines looked up, tears streaming down his face. She made me do it. She said we were cleaning up the streets. Start talking. Julian opened the folder and clicked his pen. For the next 4 hours, Clifford Baines sang. He didn't just sing. He composed an entire opera of corruption. He detailed how Halloway would signal him during trials. A touch of the glasses meant objection sustained. A sip of water meant shut this witness down. He revealed that they had a quota to hit before the fiscal quarter ended to ensure Secure Hold got their government subsidies. While Baines was crumbling, Julian took a break to step out into the hallway. Agent Sarah Jenkins was waiting for him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "How's he doing?" she asked. "He's spilling." Julian took the coffee. "He gave us the sheriff. He gave us the evidence clerk. He even gave us the private investigator Halloway used to blackmail the city council into silence." "Good," Jenkins smiled grimly. "Because we found the ledger." Julian's eyebrows shot up. "The physical one?" "Hidden in a safe behind a false wall in Halloway's wine cellar," Jenkins confirmed. "It's gruesome, Julian." She kept a tally. Names on the left, dollar amounts on the right. She literally wrote "paid" in red ink next to the names of the men she sentenced. It's not just evidence, it's a trophy collection. Julian felt a cold knot in his stomach. He had profiled serial killers who kept trophies. Halloway wasn't any different. She just used a gavel instead of a knife. "What about Leo Coletti?" Julian asked. "The public defender?" Jenkins checked her notes. "He's in the lobby. He refuses to leave until he sees you. He thinks he's in trouble." Julian sighed. "Send him in." A few minutes later, Leo Coletti walked into the small conference room. He looked shell-shocked. He was still holding his briefcase, as if it were a shield. "Mr. Hayes, or Agent Hayes," Leo stammered. I just wanted to say, I had no idea. I mean, I knew she was biased, but I didn't know. Sit down, Leo," Julian said, his voice kind. Leo sat. Am I under investigation? I lost so many cases in front of her. Did I miss the signs?" "You didn't miss anything," Julian said firmly. "You were fighting a rigged game in the dark. We've been monitoring the court transcripts for 6 months, Leo." "Do you know why I chose you?" Leo blinked. "Because I was the only PD available?" "No," Julian shook his head. "Because in 6 months of surveillance, you were the only lawyer who never stopped fighting, even when Halloway screamed at you, even when Baines mocked you. You were the only one who actually cared about the client more than your career. You're not under investigation, Leo. You're a witness. And honestly, you're a hero. Leo Coletti, a man beaten down by 20 years of a broken system, teared up. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "What happens to the others?" Leo asked. "The ones she sent away?" "That's the next phase," Julian said, standing up. "Project Clean Sweep. The Department of Justice is setting up a special task force to review every single verdict Halloway handed down in the last 10 years. We're going to need a local liaison to help coordinate with the families. Someone they trust." Julian extended his hand. "Interested in a job, Mr. District Attorney?" Leo stared at him. "Me?" "Baines is gone," Julian smiled. "The governor will have to appoint an interim DA while they sort this mess out. I'm going to make a very strong recommendation." As Leo sat there, stunned by the turn of events, Julian buttoned his jacket. The investigation was wrapping up, but the punishment was just beginning. Patricia Halloway was about to learn that in the federal system, there are no friends, only consequences. The fall from grace is not a straight line. It is a series of brutal, jagged impacts. For Patricia Halloway, the first impact was the denial of bail. The federal magistrate, a stern man named Judge Cohen from a neighboring district, looked at the evidence, the ledger, the wiretaps, Baines's confession, and declared her a profound flight risk. "You have hidden assets, Mrs. Halloway," Judge Cohen said, looking down at her over his spectacles, "and you have demonstrated a sociopathic disregard for the law. You will remain in custody until trial." She was transferred to the Oak Creek Federal Detention Center. It wasn't the maximum security hellhole of Secure Hold, but for a woman who bought her moisturizer from Switzerland and her silk sheets from Italy, it was the apocalypse. The processing center smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies. Halloway stood in a line of women, clutching a plastic bin. She was wearing her designer dress, now stained and wrinkled. "Next!" a guard barked. Halloway stepped forward. "Excuse me, officer. There must be a mistake. I am a judge. I need to speak to the warden immediately. I cannot be placed in the general population. I have enemies." The guard, a large woman named Officer Ruiz, didn't even look up from her clipboard. "Name: Judge Patricia Halloway." "Name," Ruiz repeated, looking up with bored eyes. "First and last, no titles. You ain't a judge here, honey. You're an inmate number." "Patricia Halloway," she whispered, her face burning. "Strip," Ruiz ordered. "I beg your pardon?" "Squat and cough. You know the drill. You sent enough people here," Ruiz said, popping her gum. "Unless you want me to call the extraction team to do it for you?" The humiliation was physical. Stripped of her clothes, her jewelry, and her dignity, she was handed a rough, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit. It was identical to the one Julian Hayes had worn. The fabric scratched her skin. She was marched through the cell block. As she walked, the catcalls and jeers started. The inmates had TVs. They had seen the news. They knew exactly who she was. "Hey, Judge!" a voice screamed from a top tier. "Where's your gavel now? Look at her, walking like she still owns the place." Halloway kept her head down, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "This is temporary," she told herself. "My lawyers will fix this. I am powerful. I am important." She was shoved into cell 314. The door clanged shut with a sound of finality that echoed in her bones. Her cellmate was sitting on the bottom bunk, reading a paperback book. She was a muscular woman with tattoos climbing up her neck, her hair braided tight against her scalp. She looked up slowly as Halloway stood awkwardly by the door. "Top bunk," the woman said. Her voice was low, gravelly. I can't climb," Halloway said, her voice trembling. "I have bad knees. I need the bottom bunk." The woman closed her book. She stood up. She towered over Halloway. "I didn't ask about your knees," the woman said. "I said, top bunk." Halloway scrambled up the ladder, her hands shaking so hard she almost slipped. She curled into a ball on the thin mattress, staring at the concrete ceiling. 2 days later, the real karma arrived. It was rec time. Halloway tried to stay in the corner of the yard, near the guards, but the guards seemed to be looking the other way. The blue wall of silence that she had relied on for so long had turned against her. Police officers hate dirty cops, but they hate dirty judges even more, the ones who make their badges look like jokes. A group of 3 women approached her. In the center was a woman named Marcus. No, a woman named Maria. Maria had a teardrop tattoo and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. "You don't remember me, do you?" Maria asked. Halloway pressed her back against the chain-link fence. I don't know you." "November 12th, 2018. Maria recited the date like a prayer. "My brother, Dante. He was up for a possession charge. First offense. The DA offered probation. You rejected the plea deal. You said he needed to learn a lesson. You gave him 10 years. Halloway's breath caught. She remembered the day. She had needed 3 more bodies to hit her quota for the month. Dante had just been a number. He died 4 months later. Maria stepped closer. Stabbed in the shower at secure hold. He was 19. I didn't know, Halloway whimpered. I was just following the guidelines. You wrote the guidelines, Maria screamed, lunging forward. Halloway shrieked and covered her head. But the blow didn't come. Maria stopped inches from her face. She spat on the ground at Halloway's feet. I ain't gonna touch you, Maria hissed. Because that's what you want. You want to be the victim. You want to tell the jury that the animals attacked you. Maria leaned in, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. We ain't gonna touch you, Judge. We're just gonna watch you. Every time you eat, we'll be watching. Every time you sleep, we'll be watching. You're gonna live in fear, just like you made us live. You're gonna rot in this fear. Maria turned and walked away. The other women followed. Halloway slid down the fence, sobbing into her hands. She realized then that physical violence would have been easier. This was psychological warfare. She was trapped in a cage of her own making, surrounded by the ghosts of the lives she had ruined. For the next 6 months awaiting trial, Halloway withered. She lost 20 pounds. Her hair turned grey and brittle. She stopped speaking to the guards, stopped demanding things. The arrogance was scrubbed away, leaving only a hollow shell of a woman who jumped at every shadow. She had built a factory of despair, and now she was the product. The federal trial of United States versus Patricia Halloway was the most watched legal event of the decade. But unlike her own kangaroo court, this trial was meticulous, fair, and devastatingly thorough. Julian Hayes sat in the front row every day. He wasn't there to gloat. He was there to bear witness. Halloway tried to mount a defense. She claimed she was coerced by the prison company. She claimed ignorance of the financial transfers. But the evidence was overwhelming. The ledger was the nail in the coffin. When Julian took the stand, he didn't use drama. He used facts. He played the audio recordings of Halloway mocking the defendants. He showed the video of her accepting the planted gun. He dismantled her character piece by piece, not with malice, but with truth. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. We find the defendant, Patricia Halloway, guilty on all counts. Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, judicial corruption. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month later. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was packed. But this time, the gallery wasn't filled with Halloway's wealthy cronies. It was filled with the families of her victims, mothers holding pictures of sons who were unjustly incarcerated, fathers who had lost their jobs and homes, paying legal fees for rigged trials. Judge Cohen looked at Halloway. She stood in her orange jumpsuit, trembling. Patricia Halloway, Judge Cohen said, his voice ringing with disdain. You were entrusted with the most sacred power in our society, the power to take away a person's liberty. You sold that power for handbags and vacations. You turned this courthouse into a marketplace of misery. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. There is no sentence I can give you that will restore the years you stole, but I can ensure you never steal another minute. I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole, plus 100 years. The gavel banged. It sounded like freedom. As Halloway was led away, weeping, she looked into the gallery. She locked eyes with Julian. Julian didn't smile. He just nodded, a slow, solemn acknowledgement that the balance had been restored. Outside the courthouse, the steps were flooded with sunlight. Reporters swarmed, but Julian slipped through the crowd, heading toward his car. Hey, Agent Hayes! Julian turned. It was Leo Coletti. He was wearing a new suit, fitted, sharp. He looked like a different man. The weight of the world was off his shoulders. Congratulations, Mr. District Attorney. Julian shook his hand. Acting DA, Leo corrected, beaming. But the election is in November, and the polls look good. You'll win, Julian said. People know who the real fighter was. I wanted to thank you, Leo said, his voice getting emotional again. We're reviewing the cases. We've already released 40 men. 40 innocent men are going home to their families this week because of you. Because of us, Julian corrected. The FBI just opened the door. You're the one walking them through it. Where are you going now? Leo asked. Vacation? Julian opened the door to his unmarked sedan. No such thing. There's a mayor in Chicago who's been taking bribes from a construction firm, and a sheriff in Alabama running a chop shop. The work doesn't end. Well, Leo stepped back. Give 'em hell, Julian. Always. Julian smirked. He got into the car. As he drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror. He saw the courthouse receding in the distance. It no longer looked like a fortress of corruption. It looked like a building. Just a building. The monsters had been cleared out. The shadows were gone. Julian turned on the radio, tapped the steering wheel, and drove toward the horizon. The game of chess was over. The queen had fallen, and the board was finally clear. The story of Judge Halloway is a terrifying reminder that sometimes the greatest criminals don't wear masks. They wear robes. She thought her power made her untouchable. But she forgot the most important rule of the chessboard. Even the queen can be taken by a pawn who refuses to back down. Julian Hayes proved that justice isn't about the uniform you wear, but the truth you defend. Halloway is now rotting in the very cell she profited from, a poetic justice that no amount of money can buy. If this story of karmic justice had you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It helps the channel immensely. Share this video with a friend who loves a good takedown. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next dramatic story. Justice is served, and we'll see you in the next video.